I'm Dr. Judy Butler. I'm the founder and the creator of The Guardian's Gift. Today, our speaker is Paula Wells. Paula graduated from Marshall University with a bachelor's degree in English. She holds a master's degree from the University of Virginia, a Juris Doctorate degree from the College of William and Mary, and an MDiv degree from Wake Forest University. She is one smart cookie. Paula co-pastors Second Reformed United Church of Christ in Lexington, North Carolina, with her husband, Jim, with whom she also owns their business, Mobility Plus, in High Point, North Carolina. After working with congregants in the last stages of their lives, she decided to pursue service as an end-of-life doula, working with people of all faiths and philosophies. She holds 2 certifications in end-of-life work. When she isn't working 3 jobs, she enjoys traveling, food, wine, and laughing with her grown children. Please welcome Paula Wells. Let's get started and tell me, what in the world is a death doula, and why would somebody need one or want one?
Let me start by saying that a lot of people think that death is the opposite of life, but it's really not. Death is the opposite of birth. Death is the transition beyond. Birth is the transition to life. And just like birth, there are doulas or helpers that can help people make that transition. And what I saw as a minister when I was at the bedside is how lost everyone was, including the dying person, their families. How can we help this person move from life into whatever happens beyond? There are lots of things that doulas do. There are different concentrations, different specialties that doulas have. Not all doulas do the same thing. There's the physical aspect of the doula, and that can range anywhere from making the person comfortable in the last 3 months of their lives to actually conducting what we call the death vigil when the person is actively dying. And there can be lots of things that go on during that, lots of questions that families have about the dying process and what is happening. A lot of people ask me, there's hospice, why do we need a death doula? But I think that a lot of people don't realize that often hospice is not there for the entire time the person is actively dying. That hospice is wonderful. We could not do without hospice, I don't think, in our society anymore. But their volunteers are limited. You do get great support from hospice. And I know that if they had all the volunteers that they wanted, they'd be able to do more. When you consider what we do as a society for a birth, we see it on Facebook all the time. We see the first month that the mom is pregnant, and then the second month, and the third month. There's the gender reveal. There's all of these things that prepare us for this life. It's a joyous occasion. But as you can imagine, you only die once. You have to do it alone for the most part. No one can actually transition with you. But if you could have someone that was right there with you during this whole process, could explain to you what was going on, to help you not only physically, but emotionally and spiritually in a very practical way, help you make that transition, why wouldn't you want that to be the 3 best months of your life? Now, we don't always know. There are times when there are going to be people who die quickly. And then what a doula can do is help the family on that other side of the transition. What are your choices for the disposition of the body? You would not believe the number of things that we can do with our remains once we're gone. We can explain all of those things. Many people think, I have to be embalmed. When I remind people that you don't have to do that, they go, oh yeah, that's right. Then they understand. But there are lots of things that you can do. Lots of people think, well, I don't want to be buried. I think it'd be much better to be cremated. And then I say, that is a wonderful choice. And if you're very conscious of the environment, you might not want to do that because it's actually very toxic for the environment. So is burial. Because of the metal and the concrete that you put into the ground, it actually affects groundwater. I mean, there's all these things that people are interested in. There's no judgment from a doula. Our job is to simply do what is best for our client, whatever that might be, within reason, of course. We're there to do that. The other thing that we can do after someone dies is a lot of doulas help organize belongings after the estate is settled. Often people have a very hard time letting go of things that mom and dad had. My best trick with that is we walk around the house and take pictures of objects where they are before we disperse them all. That's helpful a lot of times to families because they don't really want the stuff. They want the memory that the stuff provides. But people handle it in different ways. And again, there's no judgment to that. It is simply what you need to do. The other thing that we can do is help with the funeral arrangements of all types. And so some people even have funerals in the deceased home. There are lots of ways to go about working with the family.
Let me ask you a question. Do you have to be dying to talk to a death doula?
You know, it's interesting. I just read an article this morning about now that we are close to 250,000 having died of COVID-19, how many people are looking into their plans around dying. Young people are now really involved in this. They take this very seriously. It's a very new and interesting generation when it comes to this.
Yeah.
I've done death plans for people as young as their 20s. There are lots of folks who get married. They want their husband or wife to be very involved. Lots of times they have very strong families and they're quite afraid that their families are going to take over with the funeral arrangements and whatnot. I've done these plans for people who are actually quite young. It's better for the person who's going to be dying at some point to do it earlier because the anxiety is not there and they can think clearly. Here's the caveat. I have training in what we call the sacred passage doula. That really does focus on the last 3 months, should you know you were dying. That is a period in which you may really want certain things to be read to you, certain music played. You may want your bed placed in a certain room. You may want certain people to come visit you. You may want certain people not to visit you. If we can sit down and make that plan, it's really, really good. That would even include sounds that you want to surround yourself with, music, smells that you might want to be present that are comforting to you. And then all that may change. The nature of why you are dying and the nature of medication, you might not be able to tolerate certain things. Where you thought you wanted to be in a room flooded with light, that might change. If you think that you wanted to smell lavender, that may become repulsive to you. So we make this plan. It's wonderful to have in place if everything is ideal. And then we can counsel the client. Things may change.
That reminds me a lot of when I was a chaplain in the hospital and served there for 5 years. And one of the holiest moments for me personally as a chaplain was actually when I was at bedside for someone who was passing. It's interesting the things that we think ahead of time that we want or need, even the family members by the bedside think that they want or need. Somehow that does change for the doula or the chaplain or whoever the person is with the family and the person passing. That's important to understand.
And as you know, being a chaplain, anxiety can raise in the room. Death is a very anxious time for many family members, and the doula can also sort of guide that moment, mediate it, if you will, because there are just times where things are going to get tense. And there are other times when family members will stand around and talk as if the dying person wasn't even there. It's perfectly understandable. It's perfectly natural. We tend to avoid it, the whole conversation around death. When those kinds of things happen, the doula can kind of guide that back in. And I really want to mention this. I think this is really the most important part of my work is ritual. Whether or not you're religious doesn't matter to me. But ritual is it's an innate sense in us. It's wired into our DNA as human beings. And often we do some ceremony around the person dying, especially right after the death. The most beautiful one of which the family would have roses. They would each take a petal and place a petal on each part of the deceased body. And they would say something. They would put one on the hands of the mother and say, "We were so grateful for your hands that made these wonderful dinners for us." This great blessing of this body and a moment of closure for people who are losing someone very dear to them. It's important that people take time. Just because someone's just died in the home, you don't need to call anybody right away.
Right.
You can sit with that body, you can talk to this person, and it's important for people to have that. A doula can facilitate that kind of thing because most people are nervous about it. I encourage people, do you want to bathe the body? We used to take care of our own. We've now given that to funeral homes who do a wonderful job. But there is a lot of closure and a lot of good feelings when people are willing to kind of take part. They surprise themselves because when I first mention it, they go, "Oh, no, I'm not going to want to do that." And then they'll say, "Yes, yes, I do." And it can be done with dignity and grace, and it's quite lovely.
One of the things you're talking about, it is hard for people when you first bring up this subject and you start talking about it. At least my experience has been people don't like talking about death and dying. A lot of it has to do with being superstitious. If I talk about it, then it's going to happen. People get a little wonky around that. It's interesting that when we can engage each other about what it is we want to happen or how we would like our passing to happen, even if we present that to someone who may be sick or in the thoughts of, well, these are my last months or years or whatever, and I need to really consider it. I find that if I talk about my own, then it makes it simpler for the other person. It's really important to have these conversations early. As far as a doula is concerned, can anybody just call up a doula? How do they go about finding one, and how do they know which one's the right one?
Well, it's a great question and it's a complicated answer. There are certifications. It's not like a state license thing in most states. It's not a licensed type of job in North Carolina, for example. You can Google it. I suggest that you just ask a whole lot of questions. What are your certifications? What do those certifications mean? What did you do to get those certifications? Being certified is important. It's going to show that there's some competency there, some professionalism, which I think is important. Mostly kids want to hire them for their parents. A lot of times the parents are like, "I don't want to talk about this," not just because they're afraid or something like that, but they want to protect their kids. It's really important as I meet with the kids, and I mean grown adults, of course, and they say, "I don't know if mom will talk to you." And I'll go, "Well, let me just go and have a conversation with her and see if we can make her comfortable." And I don't charge for that, just to see if it's going to work for the family. And often, mom will say, "I don't want them worried about this. We both know this is going to happen. Your children know it's going to happen. I'm just only here to help." You just try to get a little confidence building going on there. But often the kids want it they want it around it, right? Like if I can't work directly with the dying person, they need it. They need some coordination on their part. They need someone to sit to talk with their siblings at times about how they're going to handle things. It's a good role as a mediator in a lot of ways in those situations.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of mediation, that's something probably everybody I talk to has concerns about in their families is my brother this or my sister that or Aunt Susie that. And there's always some family dynamics that are at play. This whole summit is about pre-planning. It's about taking these things that we're giving you and considering them ahead of time and putting your plans in place. The earlier you do this, the more opportunity you have to actually sit and think about it. One of the things I do want to circle back just a second that Paula was talking about was cremation and the different dispositions of the body. You could be shot off in fireworks.
You can become part of the coral reef. There's all kinds of things.
There is. And a lot of that information you can find in the Guardian's Gift. So I do want to emphasize that to you. But about the doula, how much does something like this cost? What is the price tag on hiring a doula?
I'm also an attorney, so, people often ask me, what's your fee? For doula work, I charge about $50 to $75, but it's an hour, but it's a sliding scale. If you're in a death vigil, that can cost something like $750 to $1,000 or more, depending on how long the person is actively dying. Usually it's, no more than 24 hours, but it can be 3 days. If you really do need someone and you don't have a CNA caregiver kind of person, you may really want that. A lot of people are just too scared and nervous to be with someone who's dying and know how to make them comfortable.
Talk a little bit about what your experience is as far as what it means to you to be a doula.
I just consider being with the dying the greatest honor that there is. Being a religious person myself, I absolutely feel a great presence in those moments. You've heard people talk about gatherings of souls, and that certainly does take place. There's a quietness, there's something that kind of connects you with the divine in that moment. And that goes on whether people have a particular belief system or not. There's something about that moment. There's nothing else like that experience, and knowing that you can help people when they are going to be the most alone. We come into this world alone and we leave it alone. Knowing that there was a welcoming arms of my mother when I was born was so wonderful for me. And not going to be able to have that when I die. But if I could have someone there with me who would know how to have that kind of feeling of loving arms as I'm leaving the world, I think it's just a great gift.
It is a great gift. And as I said earlier, when I served as a chaplain, the holiest moments that I think I've ever experienced were at the bedside of someone who was in the process of dying. Understand, everyone, please, that we may have our own personal faith system, but we serve all faiths and we serve all people. When you're there and it's dying, faith at that moment is not talked about. It just happens. It just is part of whatever your faith is. It's part of your process. There's no judgment. One last thing as we're getting ready to wrap up, doula. The term doula itself, it stands for, help me, I might get this wrong, Paula, dependable. O is for organized, understanding, and loving and accepting. I think
there
that's
you
what
go.
It is.
That sounds good.
Email contact for you, Paula.
Sure. It's paula.wells@mobilityplus.com.
One last comment from Connie today. Connie, thank you for that. It says that she's been in the room when someone was born and when someone died, and you can feel it. Thank you for recognizing that, Connie. Thank you, Paula, for being here. And again, I want to keep our time tight, and it's time for us to say goodbye. Everybody have a great day. Stay safe out there, okay?
Thanks, Judy.
Bye-bye.